All right, good morning. Welcome to folks who are joining us. We're just getting started here, seeing quite a few folks still trickling in and getting plugged into our system. We'll give folks another 30 seconds and then we'll go ahead and get started. All right, I think we'll continue to see more folks trickling in, but we do have quite a bit to cover today, so we'll go ahead and get started. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the SEEC Virtual Forum's third webinar of our series on maintaining local momentum toward climate goals on breach code collaboration. My name is Julia Kim. I'm the Director of Climate Change and Energy Programs at the Local Government Commission, and I will be your moderator for today's webinar. I'll actually also turn my video off just to ensure that we have a stable connection throughout today's webinar. And for those who may not be familiar with SEEC, the Statewide Energy Efficiency Collaborative is an alliance between LGC, the Institute for Local Government, ICLEI Local Governments for Sustainability, and California's 4 investor-owned utilities, and work together to support local governments to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and accelerate climate action. I want to thank our sponsors, the SEEC IOU partners, of course, as well as the Southern California Regional Energy Network and the Bay Area Regional Energy Network for making the SEEC Virtual Forum possible. And of course, to all of our promotional partners for extending our reach and helping to promote the series. The SEEC Virtual Forum is an extended virtual series running from this month through November. We'll be featuring roughly 3 webinars and 1 networking activity each month. We're so glad that you're able to join us today. This is our 3rd webinar, so we do have resources from our first 2 webinars up on our website and a few more webinars already scheduled, so we hope to see you there as well. The final webinar this month will be focused on community and climate engagement during COVID-19, really focusing on how you can continue engaging communities when you're not able to meet in person. And our first 2 webinars in July will focus on heat resilience, as well as identifying, prioritizing, and financing projects. We'll also be featuring our first networking activity of the series next week on speed networking, and hope to see many of you there. And we also recently launched a SEEC bingo game. This is really in an effort to try to provide the value of networking that many participants are able to get through the in-person forum. So we encourage you to hop on over to the forum webpage at californiaseek.org/2020-forum, where you can download the SEEC bingo board. And from there you can identify folks who match the traits on the board, connect with them, and the first 5 people to submit their full bingo boards will win a pretty cool sustainability prize. So hope to see many of you engaging in this as well. And before we get started, just wanted to run through some logistics briefly. As you can see, due to the large number of participants, everyone has been muted except for our panelists. But we do hope you'll engage in the discussion by submitting questions for our panelists through the Q&A module. Please feel free to submit questions at any point during the webinar, and we'll cover that during the Q&A panel discussion towards the end of today's session. You can also upvote questions from other participants if you're particularly interested in seeing a response to that. We also encourage you to use the chat function to engage with your peers, as well as to reach out to LGC staff should you encounter any technical issues or have any questions about the SEEC Virtual Forum. Today, I'm joined by Tia Tyler, Serena Sora, and Ryan Dana from LGC's team. So again, feel free to reach out to any of us. And for those who are joining us through YouTube, we encourage you to submit questions through the live chat, which we are also monitoring, and we'll share any questions that we see in the live chat with today's moderator. And finally, this webinar is being recorded and all resources will be made available on the SEEC Forum webpage. And at last, I'll pass it over to the main moderator for today's webinar, which will be Christopher Kutch. And Mr. Kutch has worked in various aspects of building engineering science for over 10 years. He currently works with Southern California Edison and the Energy Codes and Standards team on development and advocacy of Title 24, Part 6, building energy efficiency code and supporting local jurisdictions in local energy ordinance adoption. Thanks so much, Chris, for joining us today, and I'll pass it over to you.
Thanks, Julia, and good morning, everybody, and welcome to our presentation for today. So before we get started, we're going to put up a poll question, and if you could, please take a moment to answer that, and so we can get to know you a little bit better. And while you're doing that, just wanted to welcome everybody again to our panel presentation, Maintaining Local Momentum Towards Climate Goals, Reach Code Collaboration, and a big thanks to LGC for organizing this great online event. And we'll give you a virtual round of applause right now. So there you go. And as many of you know, 2020 has been a banner year for Reach Code adoption. There's been more Reach Code adoption this year than in the past 3 years combined. And a lot of this is because cities across California have seen Reach codes as a strong and effective way for them to reduce emissions in their building sector, and also an avenue for cities to reach their long-term climate action goals. So we're really excited to have a lineup of Reach Code experts today that are going to share with us how we can continue the Reach Code momentum towards a clean and sustainable future. So to introduce myself, I'm Chris Kutch. I'll be your moderator today. I'm the Reach Code lead at Edison, and the Reach Code program is actually a statewide program. So even if you're not in Edison territory, there's a Reach Code program lead at all the IOUs. So we're willing to help any of you across the state. So a little bit about our program. Essentially, the Reach Code program is here to support you. So we develop a lot of the cost effectiveness studies that cities have used as part of the Reach Code application, but our support doesn't stop there. If there's any way that we can support you towards Reach Code adoption, we're here for you. And if we can't do it, we'll point you to the right people. So that's a little bit about me. And to going on to the panelists. So our first presentation is from Danuta. She's with the CEC. She'll be covering the role of the CEC in Reach Code adoption. Next, we'll hear from Corey from the city of Chula Vista. And they're doing a lot of innovative approaches in their Reach Code development for this cycle and the next coming cycles. So we'll be hearing from him and what Chula Vista is doing. And then next we'll hear from Yvonne from Palo Alto. And Palo Alto has had a long history of developing and implementing Reach Code. So she's going to be sharing some of her valuable experiences in Reach Code development and implementation. Next, we'll have Misty. She's a lead consultant for the IOU Reach Code team, and she'll be sharing some of the latest resources and tools we have available for all of you to use. And lastly, we'll have Danuta, which she'll be wrapping up the presentations with an update on Reach Code adoption across the state, and we'll end our presentation time with a Q&A session. So Julia, maybe we can see the results of the poll. Well, there you go. Okay. Well, thank you all for participating in that poll. That's very helpful. And with that, I'll pass it on to Danuta.
Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me?
Hi, Danuta. Yeah, we can hear you.
Thank you. I am here this morning to go over the important but limited role of the CEC, the California Energy Commission, in the local ordinance Reach Code approval process. Next slide, please. The CEC's authority comes from a section of the Public Resources Code, which states that the enforcement of a local building efficiency ordinance occurs when the city or county files the basis of its determination that the standards are cost effective with the commission. And the commission finds that the standards will require the diminution of energy consumption levels permitted by the rules and regulations adopted pursuant to those sections. This is our defining language. Specifically, CEC approval to enforce is needed when local ordinances have more stringent efficiency requirements than the current version of the Energy Code, and provides the jurisdiction with the ability to enforce their local ordinance until state standards change to the next code cycle. If you're working on a local ordinance, when should you contact the CEC? Anytime. Anytime you have questions about applications and the application process. The only area we can't advise on is ordinance content, because that would be a conflict of interest. However, Misty is going to provide you with excellent resources for that later on in the session. It helps if you let us know that you're preparing an ordinance before you actually submit it, so that we can get you, so that we can be prepared to get you into the approval process pipeline. And I'll tell you more about that in a minute. First of all, though, what's required in an application? First of all, the proposed energy standards, the complete text of the adopted file signed ordinance. Next, the local government agency's energy savings and cost effectiveness findings, including any supporting analysis. A statement or finding by your local government agency that the energy standards will require buildings to be designed to consume no more energy than permitted by the Energy Code. And any findings, determinations, declarations, or reports, including any negative declaration or environmental impact report required pursuant to the California Environmental Quality Act. And that's typically a notice of CEQA exemption. In addition, it's nice to have, but not required, a cover letter addressed to the executive director of the commission, and any staff reports other than those providing the supportive analysis for local savings and cost findings. These I particularly like to read because it tells us so much about your community, what you are interested in promoting in terms of efficiency, and the public process that you went through. Also, any copies of public comments that you received locally addressing the ordinance and development of the ordinance. Once we have this, staff reviews and processes the application, then makes a recommendation for approval to the executive director. The executive director, in turn, makes a recommendation to the commission chair and other commissioners. Next slide. So to get into the process a little deeper, once we have your application, we review it first of all for completeness. If it's not complete, staff requests any missing materials. If it is complete, staff sends a notice to management requesting permission to post the application to the commission docket. It can take a week or more before the application is actually posted to the docket. In the meantime, if there are any Word and Excel documents in your application, they're converted to PDF formats and scanned for accessibility prior to that docket posting. Finally, once the applications are posted to the docket for the required public comment period, that typically takes 15 days. Behind the scenes, staff is preparing and submitting a summary of the ordinance and a memorandum for management signature. That also involves making an oral presentation about the ordinance to management. After management has signed approval and the public comment period has closed, staff submits a request to the Secretariat to include the application on the business meeting agenda. Requests to be on the business meeting agenda must be received 3 weeks in advance of the business meeting in order to be included. So this is the approval process pipeline that I mentioned earlier. So it's a specific step by specific step by specific step, and they all take a certain amount of time to complete. The ordinance is enforceable, however, as soon as the CEC has voted to approve it at a business meeting. In conclusion, I want you to know that REACH codes are first and foremost local ordinances. The CEC has an important but limited legal role as prescribed by statute to approve ordinance applications that meet statutory requirements so that they are enforceable during the time the current energy code is effective. Thank you.
Thanks, Danuta. And behalf of the Codes and Standards REACH Code team and many of the jurisdictions out there that have adopted REACH codes, I just wanted to thank the CEC for their efforts in supporting REACH code adoption and in turning around those applications as fast as you can. You guys are doing a great job, so appreciate that. And next, our next panelist is Yvonne from the city of Palo Alto, and she is going to talk about what the city is doing there. Thanks, Yvonne.
All right. Thank you, Chris. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for inviting me to be a speaker for this forum. So Palo Alto has had a long experience and rich history on REACH codes, and today I'm going to talk about a little bit of our history and experiences with REACH code. So as an early adopter, we had adopted green building regulations since 2008 and an energy REACH code since 2008. I think the 2008 cycle, we had like a 10% better than the California energy code requirement at that time. So since then, every code cycle, we've always had an energy REACH code that we have adopted as a local ordinance and applied through the Energy Commission and then ultimately with the Building Standards Commission. And in addition to that, we've also adopted as our Cal Green for sustainability, Cal Green Tier 1 and Tier 2 voluntary measures as mandatory for new construction and large additions since 2013. Next, please. Okay, so for community outreach, Palo Alto's had a green building advisory group since 2013, which is a stakeholder group of architects, engineers, contractors, green building officials, energy modelers, and staff to help weigh in and provide direction for REACH codes and energy green building codes and energy REACH codes for the city. We also have a technical advisory group, which is a subcommittee of the Green Building Advisory Group. And that subcommittee works directly on vetting priorities and strategies for our REACH code for like the 2019 code cycle. So they participated and vetted in about building electrification and energy measures. Next, please. So part of our vetting for the 2019 cycle is that we had a Green Building Summit, which was a full day retreat back in February of 2018. And we had invited special guest speakers such as the Commissioner McAllister from the Energy Commission, Brian Berry from Passive House Network, and they joined a panel of experts to discuss the future of green building. We had over 100 participants show up for this Green Building Summit of stakeholders and others from the Green Building Advisory Group. And We had group discussions to discuss the goals of green building and energy reach codes for the 2019 code cycle. And during this summit, we also voted on what strategies and priorities we would follow in Palo Alto. Next, please. Okay, so building electrification is one of the key action goals that we have for our climate action plan for Palo Alto. The goal for our SCAP goals is 80% reduction of greenhouse gas emissions from the 1990 levels by 2030. We call it the 80 by 30 goal, and it is a lofty goal that is 20 years in advance of the state goals. So some of the key focus areas that we look for this SCAP goal is energy, once again, electrification through voluntary and mandatory measures, mobility to reduce single occupancy vehicle travel, electric vehicles to increase the penetration of electric vehicles within our community, inbound and outbound, water, more efficient use of water and finding sustainable resources and protecting the bay, climate adaptation and sea level rise, which is a huge concern in the Bay Area. It's projected we could have anywhere from 2 to 3 foot rise, sea level rise within the Bay Area, which could produce catastrophic results. Natural environment, so we're talking about promoting the natural canopy and encouraging native species in landscaping. And zero waste, we now have a deconstruction ordinance effective July 1st, where we're requiring all full building demolitions to be deconstructed. Next, please. So this is a vision that was developed by the advisory group, the Green Building Advisory Group, back in 2013. And this was like a sort of like our roadmap to our aspirational goals for zero net energy at that time. So now that goal has already been reached with the current code cycle, now that we require PVs with new construction. And this goal is now shifted to carbon neutrality within our utilities, and hopefully and ultimately to a carbon neutral city. Next, please. So for the 2019 code cycle, we have adopted a new energy reach code, and it is a reach code for new construction for residential and non-residential buildings. Next, please. So the specifics for the low-rise residential, which includes 1 and 2 family and multifamily buildings, is that effective April 1st, which is now passed, new construction has to be all electric design. And this was adopted by council last December, and the year to date that we've received 44 new single family dwelling permits and 6 new multifamily and mixed use buildings for a total of 50 new all electric building designs that have been submitted to the city to this date. Thank you. Next, please. Okay, for non-residential and high-rise residential, we still have 2 pathways to compliance for energy, for the energy code. We have an all-electric path and a mixed fuel pathway. So if you design an all-electric new design building, you do not have to provide any additional energy efficiencies above the energy code, the California Energy Code, or what we call the base code. And for mixed fuel buildings, you do have to provide a compliance margin above the base code. So for retail and office buildings, you have to be 12% or better. For motel and high rise, you have to be, and other occupancies, other non-res occupants, you have to be 5%. And we have an exception for life science and industrial manufactured buildings. So this was effective January 1st. Yeah, next please, thank you. Okay, so phase 2 of our energy reach code. So we were directed by council to come back later in the year and require and propose an ordinance to require all electric design for commercial and ADUs. And the reason why we had to go back for that one is because we had to develop a new cost-effectiveness study that covered larger commercial buildings than what the statewide study had originally intended. And we had some challenges with ADUs because they are smaller construction and can't always install a heat pump water heater. So now we've also discovered that the statewide has also picked up this scope of work in a cost-effectiveness study. So we will use the statewide cost-effectiveness study and propose an ordinance for all electric on commercial and ADUs. Next, please. So just to give you a history of what we've done in the past. So in the last code cycle, we did have a reach code for residential, low-rise residential, and it required 10% better than the energy code or the base code if you did not install photovoltaics. And if you installed the photovoltaics, you did get a PV credit. So the margins of the compliance margin was higher. So it was 20% for single family and 12% for multifamily. Next, please. Okay. And for the past code cycle for non-res commercial buildings, we did require 10% better than the base code if they did not install photovoltaics. And if they did install photovoltaics, then they only need to install a minimum of 5 kilowatt system or larger. And we figured that most commercial buildings will try to balance their PV generation with their demand. So in most cases, we've seen that those systems are larger than 5 kilowatts. So we just sort of put a minimum standard, and that was in our cost-effective study. So that sort of recaps kind of our past history and where we've been and where we're going with reach codes in Palo Alto. And I'd like to pass it on back to Chris.
Thanks, Yvonne. One thing I just really appreciate about how Palo Alto approaches their reach codes is how you just use the flexibility found in reach codes to really address the local needs of the city, and just how you guys are able to just put a creative package together to meet those local needs. So great job with what you're doing up there in Palo Alto. And just as a reminder to the participants, feel free to drop in your questions in the Q&A. We'll be collecting those and using those as questions in our Q&A session at the end of our presentation. So feel free to throw in those questions and we will get to those. And next up, we're going to move down south to Chula Vista. And we're going to hear from Corey and hear all the great things they're doing down there with reach codes. Thanks, Corey.
Perfect. Thank you very much. You can, next slide. Thank you very much for having me come, and it's great to hear about some of the work that other jurisdictions are doing and the kind of the map of reach codes across our state. For just a little bit of history of what Chula Vista has done, we've adopted kind of more traditional reach codes, just percent above. We've adopted more prescriptive outdoor lighting reach codes, as well as solar hot water heating and solar pre-plumbing ordinances, and then also laundry to landscape ordinances, looking at reusing some water consumption in our residents as well. It's important to point out that last year we did go back and remove the solar hot water pre-plumbing ordinance. It wasn't being taken advantage of in the way that we anticipated, so we went back and kind of cleaned that up, and that's something that you may have to do for some of the ordinances. Currently, we're developing ordinances that look at more of the existing buildings in our community, whether that be on the residential side, a retrofit requirement, or a commercial benchmarking program. I'll be talking mainly about the residential program, but it kind of fits with our other programs as well. Next slide. So the city of Chula Vista as I mentioned, we've adopted previous REACH codes in the past, and those came from largely our climate change working group, which is a group of community members that propose recommendations on how the city can address climate change. And they've previously, as I mentioned, proposed new construction codes. And looking at that history, they also wanted to expand some of those into the existing buildings that we're having in our community as well. So that's where in our climate action plan, a requirement for energy efficiency improvements in existing homes came from. But with that requirement that was adopted in our climate action plan, kind of that gave us the general area that we wanted to go. But then as we were looking at how do we want to put that in place, one of the tools that really was helpful was the statewide energy efficiency cost effectiveness study. As I mentioned, there's a few different studies that are out there. The one that we leveraged was the existing building study, but it really gave us a big boost in our momentum for policy creation. You can kind of, we were able to take the study off the shelf, minimize a lot of the needs, adapt and show the impact that we'll have locally in Chula Vista. But that study really gave us the kind of the foundation and helps us focus the ordinance. Next slide. And as we were creating that ordinance and reaching out to stakeholders, there's a lot of how you implement an ordinance impacts it, the impact of it, as well as what the community, how the community experiences the ordinance a lot. And some of the things that we were hearing from stakeholders was, we want to build high efficiency buildings, and we're doing that already. So we created a performance path if they're putting in high efficiency devices or product equipment already, they can take account for that, as well as a lot of the requirements called out in the study in our ordinance are for things like LED light bulbs or attic insulation, which may well already be in the home, and we wanted to account for that as well. Our goal for this ordinance is really to bring up the least efficient homes here in Chula Vista. If you're kind of going above and beyond already, that's not really what the goal of this ordinance is for. So we wanted to create some flexibility in the ordinance for that. Next slide. And again, working with stakeholders and finding that right balance between, getting energy savings out of the buildings and ensuring that the ordinance is good to comply with. We went to our city council and got some recommendation to include some more flexibility into the ordinance. And so some of the things that, we've learned a lot about and that I think can go to some of the comments and the concerns about stakeholder opposition are making sure that we're listening to our stakeholders when we're talking with them. Things like improvements for medical necessity or ADUs were things that, they have their own reasons for making those improvements, and it might not fit the justification for why we're looking to make these energy efficiency improvements there. So we created some exemptions to help ensure that, for those people that are doing those specific improvements, they're not going to be unduly burdened by this project or by our ordinance. And that's something that we heard even as city leaders were telling us to kind of go back to the stakeholders. We definitely heard that they saw the impact that stakeholders were having in the process, and stakeholders were very complimentary on a lot of the elements that we put into this ordinance to minimize some of that. Another option that we have, we're looking at kind of doing a low income exemption, still having a recommendation, but maybe not as required. But there are other approaches like the city of Carlsbad down here in San Diego County who adopted a project value threshold. So that's another way to ensure that you're not unduly impacting any of the residents that are compliant with the ordinance. Next slide. And then finally, for policy development, communication is really important. Ordinances are very specific language, and to average residents and business owners, it can seem very technical, which it is. So we're in the process of creating checklists, websites to help ensure that the communication and the information is presented in a very straightforward and easy to read way, so that residents know about those exemptions or what specific types of projects need to comply. That's all really important and something that we're currently working on right now. And then finally, the ordinance will only impact a small percentage of existing buildings, but there's other buildings that are not going to be triggered through additions or remodels. And so we definitely want to encourage those other homeowners to make similar energy efficiency actions as well. So, we see this while the requirement is really key to getting those improvements into our community. We definitely want to go beyond that through programs like the Chula Vista Climate Action Challenge to encourage voluntary actions as well, because we know that's where the biggest piece of the energy efficiency pie is. Next slide. And then last, I just kind of, with COVID-19 budget impacts, we're definitely going to have to reevaluate our budgets and see kind of what we can do going forward. But I think it's important to point out that if we're able to overcome those budget shortfalls, there's a lot of other city elements and city programs that energy efficiency ordinances can help support. Whether that's bringing up and increasing the value and the quality of our older homes in our community to help with our equity plans, or adding insulation and reducing water consumption helps with our community resilience to climate change impacts we're already seeing, and then health impacts. The chart here on the right is for commercial buildings, but I really like how they had the building for preventing spreads of disease, similar to PPE, which we're all very familiar with now. This is for commercial properties, so a little bit different than just your residential use pattern. But I think it just does go to show that our homes and our built environments do impact our health, and it's important to keep those co-benefits in mind as we're adopting energy efficiency ordinances as well. Thank you. I think that should be my last slide.
Thanks, Corey. Really great to hear what you guys are doing down there in Chula Vista. Really appreciate how the city is engaging all the different stakeholders and reaching out to the residences, making sure that they're well up to speed on what you guys are thinking about with reach codes. So thank you for that. And at this point, maybe many of you on the line might be wondering, okay, what does this mean for me? It's really great to see what other cities are doing, but how do I find a reach code that would be appropriate for my jurisdiction? And so that's why we have our next speaker, Misty. She's a lead consultant with many years of helping jurisdictions across California in understanding the reach code process and developing some really great tools and offering support statewide. So I will pass it on to Misty, and she'll talk more about what those resources and tools are. Thanks, Misty.
Thank you, Chris. As Chris noted, I'm going to provide just a high-level overview of the variety of resources that are available to help local jurisdictions navigate the reach code development and implementation process today. The program's primary objective is to facilitate the adoption of reach codes and to support you throughout that entire process. Both Corey and Yvonne mentioned the cost effectiveness studies that are required for energy reach codes. And we've found over the years that documenting the cost effectiveness of a proposed ordinance can be one of, if not the biggest hurdle in the adoption process, as it can be very costly and time consuming. And so these cost effectiveness analyses are one of the main resources we provide through the program. We work with jurisdictions to scope the studies and then complete the analysis throughout the state so that anyone that would like to can use the studies in their ordinance. By doing that analysis statewide, it eliminates the need to replicate these studies over and over again at the local level. So both saving time and money for everybody. And in this cycle, with the increased interest in reach codes as effective policy tools, we've dramatically expanded the suite of tools we have available. So we also offer model ordinance language now, staff report templates, checklists. We can do workshops and presentations to stakeholders, all different kinds of resources. And we also now publish a newsletter that regularly highlights our frontrunners or local leaders in Reach Codes activities. Could you go back one slide, please? We recently completed a website refresh on the localenergycodes.com website, and we've reorganized the site around Reach Code objectives and requirements versus our previous organization around the state base code. And so now the flow moves from kind of the general to the more specific as you move through the site, starting with the 5 basic Reach Code paths that you see shown at the top of the slide. Within each of those paths, we have filters that allow you to select particular subcategories, and then finally more specific requirements. And for each requirement, we note the major pros and cons. And then we also provide a list of cities that have adopted a similar ordinance so that you can see what those ordinances look like. The resources that you see, no, still there, sorry. The resources shown at the bottom of the screen were developed collaboratively with several different organizations, including the Building Decarbonization Coalition, BayREN, New Buildings Institute, several Bay Area community choice energy groups, and also with staff from several different jurisdictions providing feedback and review for us on each item. So there's 3 major types of resources. There's the resources that fit with the application package for the CEC. There's internal staff resources such as model staff report and things like that. And then also implementation tools for after the adoption. The resources help jurisdictions that have limited time or limited staff time leverage previous efforts so that you can improve the efficiency of your process. By working together to incorporate multiple perspectives into each resource, we were able to significantly reduce duplication and then also provide a consistent core of materials from which to begin, which helps improve compliance during the implementation. Okay, next slide. The site also has a new interactive map that provides a picture of both statewide and regional Reach Code activities. And it also allows the user to easily access the details of a specific ordinance. For this example, I've selected the city of Healdsburg in Sonoma County. And on the right, you can see there's a description of the ordinance requirements and links to the ordinance, the municipal code, and to the staff report. So you can access each of these easily. You can select a city from the map itself directly, or you can also use the filter tool that's shown on the left of the screen to filter the results by those 5 categories we showed earlier. And then you can view a list of the cities that have adopted based on those categories. Lastly, there's a button at the bottom that says View Adopted Ordinances, where you can download a list that includes all of this information within one PDF file for all of the adopted ordinances across the state. Okay, next slide. We also have a collection of other related resources where you can find, first, the cost effectiveness studies, but you can also find tools for climate action planning. There are the CEQA documents, so you can reference those, links to both the CEC and the Building Standards Commission and their pages regarding local ordinances, as well as a variety of other resources that are related to Reach Codes. Please, I'd like to note that this is a work in progress and we're continuing to update this page. So if there are other links that you think would be useful for other jurisdictions, please send them along to me. I'd be happy to include them. Okay, next slide. That wraps up my very quick review of the program resources. As you can see, there's a lot of things available on the site. I encourage you to check out the new website. Follow us on Twitter and sign up for our newsletter as well. Please don't hesitate to contact us to request support. All of our program activities are driven by the community's needs and the requests that we receive. So please let us know how we can help. Thank you. Back to you, Chris.
Thanks, Misty. So I see a lot of the questions starting to come in. So I want to jump to our final presentation with Danuta on a quick update on reach codes, and then we'll try to have plenty of time at the end for Q&A. So Danuta, please, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chris. This is a summary, just a quick table showing you the local ordinances historically and for this code cycle. So you've got this code cycle at the top. We have 25 ordinances approved so far. Going back through 2016, 2013, 2008, and previous to that, there were a total of 106 local ordinances that have been submitted to the CEC for approval from a total of 68 different jurisdictions. We are seeing some trends in this code cycle toward electrification and decarbonization, and that is different from previous code cycles where the emphasis was typically on efficiency or increased use of photovoltaic systems. Next slide, please. There are, as I said, specific trends, but within those trends, there's a lot of variety. So in addition to electric preferred or all electric ordinances, we are seeing requirements for green roofs, solar thermal systems, battery storage or pre-wiring for future battery storage systems, low carbon concrete, so looking at decarbonization in building materials, LEED and Greenpoint rated certified cool roofs, and as you heard from Chula Vista, retrofits are on the horizon. Next, please. And these are the 25 local jurisdictions that have been approved in this code cycle. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Okay, great, Danuta. So at this point, we are going to jump into Q&A, and I think some of the panelists will be revealing themselves. Faces behind the voices that you're all hearing just now. So I'm going through the Q&A right now, and thank you all for asking these great questions. So the first one up, at least on my list with the most thumbs up, is, I'll just read the question here. What is the status of the Berkeley lawsuit regarding their all-electric buildings reach code? So I'm gonna give this one first to Misty. Misty, can you provide an answer to this question? If not, feel free to pass it on to somebody else.
I can tell you what I know. And as of about a month ago, it had not been resolved. I spoke with them about a month ago. They had anticipated a resolution, but because of the pandemic, things were delayed. And so there was not a schedule available that I was aware of for the resolution. I'm not sure if there's anyone from Berkeley on the call today that could provide other information, but that was the last I had heard.
Okay, thank you, Misty. Next question, 7 likes here. So the question is, due to the economic recession caused by COVID-19, there are many interest groups opposing electrification, BMT reduction, etc. Do you have, oh, this is jumping around on me. Do you have any advice for how local jurisdictions can obtain buy-in for reach codes and continued progress on climate action during this difficult time? So I'll give this one either to Corey or Yvonne, if you guys want to share some insight on this.
Okay. All right, so I'll just start first. So interestingly enough, in Palo Alto, it's a very, very progressive council and I would say, advocacy groups within Palo Alto for the environment. So for the most part, when we were proposing REACH codes to council last year and we were doing the public outreach, we received more comments that we weren't going far enough. And so with the community in Palo Alto, they really want to do as best as they can. They want to be leaders in the community as far as developing sustainability goals, REACH codes. During the COVID shelter in place, we have noticed that a lot of people are not commuting as much. So some of the SCAP goals would be like, can we require that city employees at least, work remotely at least 2 days a week, if not more, if not entirely. And then in the council meeting, there is even discussion is, can we impose that on the, businesses within Palo Alto? So, or at least encourage it somehow. So there are talks about that. And then there's also talk about when we want to encourage electric vehicles, how are we going to build the infrastructure to support requiring additional electric vehicles, and then the extreme end of these goals in order to meet the 80 by 30 was talking about, can we ban can we ban gas vehicle registration in Palo Alto? That would be the extreme end, and also maybe even like banning additional gas hookups. So that's what we're doing in Palo Alto. And then there's also some, definitely there's some, there is some concern for affordable housing, making electrification, providing funding for maybe affordable housing to electrify and to install electric vehicle charging stations.
And I'll kind of add to that and also touch on the question below about some of the stumbling blocks. One thing I think is that at least we kind of really focused in on is, you mentioned that, or the question mentions the opposition to electrification and VMT reduction, but we're really focused on energy efficiency, which is something that we can kind of point back and say, we've adopted energy efficiency ordinances in the past. These are energy efficiency measures that will help the residents save energy. So really focus and kind of really tie it to that core of energy efficiency and build off that energy efficiency support we've or past the history that we have of energy efficiency. I won't say that it will necessarily get around it. We'll have to see what our city council supports when we bring it back. But one of the other things that I'll mention, and I mentioned in my presentation, but listening and incorporating the stakeholders' feedback into the ordinance is definitely something that we've done. Whether that be through, like I said, some of the low income exemptions, just to make residents kind of ensure that those types or those community members aren't unduly impacted. That's been some really big helps, but also, like I said, just kind of having it be focused so that it's kind of building off what the cities have already done in the past has been something that's helpful for us.
Great, Corey, thank you. So we're going to move on to our next question, which is one I hold dear to my heart because I work for Edison. Edison is holding public forums for their proposed electric rate increases, which are largest for residential development at 14.4%. Under all electric residential development mandates with REACH codes, what are the impacts to housing affordability? So this is a great question, and it really gets to one of the pillars of REACH codes, which is cost effectiveness. So many of you have heard that term, cost effectiveness report, many times. So the purpose of this report is to show that that a proposed REACH code is cost effective, and which is one of the requirements set by the CEC. So part of the cost effectiveness analysis includes looking at rates. That's a large part of whether or not a measure shows cost effectiveness or not. So in our latest 2019 residential reach code cost effectiveness reports, we spent a lot of time and research looking into electric rate increases, not just electric utility, but also gas utility as well. And there's increases across the board. And so all that was taken into account, and you can read more about that and that methodology within our cost effectiveness report, which is on localenergycodes.com. So I'll plug the website again. And there you can get more details on those assumptions and the results that come from that. Misty, did you want to add anything to what I just said?
I think you covered it fairly well, Chris.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. And maybe we'll have time for one more question here. So Yvonne, did you want to add on at all to the question of the biggest stumbling block for adopting reach codes and how you were able to overcome them in Palo Alto?
Okay, so in this past reach code, we really had challenges because we were trying as staff to balance what was practical versus lofty goals from the community. And so initially we tried to come up with a reach code that allowed 2 pathways, all electric and mixed fuel. And so then when we took it out to the community for community outreach, we got responses all across the board. And we even had council members attending these community outreach meetings because everybody was really curious. We had the environmental advocacy groups, carbon-free Palo Alto, that were pushing us that we weren't pushing the envelope enough. And then we had homeowners coming in saying, well, can I get a rebate, if I do, electrification retrofits. So, the hard part was just trying to come up with a proposal that everybody could agree on. And ultimately, when we took it to council, council overwhelmingly decided that they would go with all electric because that was the trend. So it was just hard coming up as staff, coming up with a project that come up with a middle ground, because we heard the environmental advocacies, but we were also concerned about, what we call the silent majority and the people that don't know what they don't know. And will they be shocked when, we, propose this or implement a reach code that they don't even know anything about, The interesting thing is a lot of the community doesn't even know what electrification is. And so there needs to be a lot of education, is what we discovered in Palo Alto.
Okay, thanks, Yvonne. So we're at time almost. So thank you all for the great presentations and answering those questions. At this point, I'm going to hand it back to Julia, and she's going to wrap us up.
On mute. Thanks, Chris. And thank you so much to Yvonne, Corey, Danuta, Misty, everyone for joining us today, and to all of our participants for taking the time to join us. If you have any remaining questions for our panelists, feel free to reach out to folks. You can see their emails and phone numbers listed up here. It will be included in the presentation as well, which will be posted on the SEEC Forum website by the end of the week. And hopefully we'll get a chance to see you again for some of our upcoming opportunities. As I noted, we have three scheduled webinars over the next few weeks, and then our first networking activity will be next week, focused on speed networking. And with that, I think we can wrap up. Thanks again, everyone, and hope to see you again soon.